It was just yesterday that I had to settle one of those kind of fights. If you grew up with a sibling or two or three, you know what kind of fight I'm talking about. We were at the Pride Parade, and candy was being passed out by those in the parade. One of my children, who will remain anonymous, thought that their sibling had gotten more candy than them. So after they had made their sibling aware of their complaint, they turned and involved their parents. There are times that I think that these kind of fights might dissipate as children grow into adults, but I have officiated enough funerals and talked with enough families at those times to know that it's simply not true. See, if one of our children had been with us yesterday and they would have received the candy, they would have probably thought it was just enough, and they might even have been grateful. But since they were both there, they were watching each other, trying to make sure that they stayed even and everything was fair as it was supposed to be. The situation that I and Holly found ourselves in yesterday is somewhat similar to the situation Jesus finds coming before him. The story we just read about Jesus takes place when Jesus is teaching thousands of people. This is not a small crowd that is gathered to hear him. It is then that this man steps forward to ask Jesus to tell his brother to divide the inheritance with him. This is more than just a simple case about money that a parent is leaving for the children. It's really so much more. The inheritance that the man is talking about is the land. When the Israelite nation came into the promised land, each of the 12 tribes were given a piece of the land according to their population, and that was to stay within their tribe forever. As a side note, there's all kinds of rules about how the land is to be bought and sold in Leviticus, but we'll come back to that Levitical passage soon. The land was never to be outside of the family or the tribe, and if it did go outside the family, there were very specific rules on how to buy it back. But here we find a son not getting any of the land that belonged to his parents. He's coming to Jesus asking for justice, maybe asking and pleading for what is fair. But Jesus answers the man, "Who made me a judge or arbiter over you?" There were many who held the position of judge in the land of Israel. There were ones that would take care of all the disputes. There was no formal law system like we have today, but elders in the community would serve as arbiters. But in this moment, this man is trying to maybe shame his brother because there is a large crowd there before Jesus. He might have wanted Jesus to rule on the matter at hand. It seems that he really just wanted to tattle on his older brother in front of the whole community. And as a younger sibling, I get the impulse. But Jesus sees through the masquerade and goes truly to the heart of the matter, warning the man in the crowd about greed, and that greed comes in all sorts of form. And Jesus tells the parable about a farmer who has a great year. There's a couple things to note in this parable, the first being the ground. Notice that Jesus doesn't say that the farmer or the rich man worked hard, planted the seeds, faithfully weeded the field, and so he reaped a great harvest. No, it simply says that the land of the certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. It was not the rich man that made this happen. In fact, the parable implies that God, the true owner of the soil, made the crops plentiful. See, the ground here is the land that God had given to the Israelites when they came into the promised land. Throughout the book of Leviticus and elsewhere in the Torah, the Israelites are reminded that they are simply stewards of this land that God has given them. God is the true owner, and they are simply taking care of it for God for a while. And so when the land produces abundantly, it is a true blessing from God. But when the rich man sees that he has had a large harvest, he begins to ponder what to do with it. We might be reminded of the years of plenty that Joseph predicted and then helped the Pharaoh store for the years of famine as the Israelite nation first went down into Egypt, saving many lives. But this rich man is not looking out for those around him. We gain a glimpse into his mind as we hear his inner monologue. From his place of privilege, he uses the personal pronouns 10 times in the story. He is all about himself and what he is going to do with his own crops. His favorite words are me, myself, and I, mine. He talks solely about what he is going to do for himself with his abundant crops. In the story, the man is blessed with a wonderful harvest, but he's never seems to think to give thanks. Gratitude never crosses his mind. He is self-absorbed, only focused on his own pleasures. His daydream is to spend his future indulging his whims and desires. The great good he can imagine in his life is maximizing his own pleasure. The gifts and blessings that this man received did not result in a grateful heart. Gratitude is an interesting thing. I know many people that practice gratitude on a regular basis, whether it is writing down their blessings in a journal, or I know of others who recite their blessings that they had during the day as they fall asleep at night. One of my favorite old-time hymns that I can remember singing in country churches is Count Your Blessings. We do not have it in our hymnal, or we would be singing it this morning. Now, right now, either you're looking up to see if I'm wrong, or you're humming that hymn in your head. But as I thought about gratitude, I found an article from Psychology Today. I want to share a few of the things that I found in that article. Gratitude is an emotion expressing appreciation for what one has, as opposed to, for example, a consumer-driven emphasis on what one wants or what one needs. Tossing off the half-hearted thanks won't cut it. Deep gratitude comes from within in a meaningful way. This spotlights the highly social aspect of the feeling of gratitude. Gratitude is getting a great deal of attention as a facet of positive psychology. Practicing gratitude means paying attention to what we are thankful for to the degree of feeling more kind and compassionate towards the world at large. It can motivate people to make positive changes in their lives. Studies show that people who deliberately cultivate gratitude by literally counting their blessings and writing letters of thanks find themselves with increased well-being, health, and happiness. Being grateful and especially in expressing it, can also be associated with increased energy, optimism, and empathy. The line about the long life struck me in the article from Psychology Today because the rich man's life was definitely shortened in Jesus' parable. They go on concerning the benefits of gratitude. Feeling grateful starts with acknowledging that life is good and rewarding. This bountiful emotion of life is abundant, makes a person feel grateful towards loved ones, colleagues, animals, and of course, Mother Nature. This is also utility and gratitude of helping one make amends and solving issues at hand. Reciprocity is not needed in feeling gratitude. The receiver is often compelled to pay the goodness forward, generating positivity all around. It is here, though, I want to say and take a step away from what we're talking about and say that gratitude is not a cure-all. There are those among us, and even myself, who have struggled with depression and anxiety at a very real moments. And this cannot be helped without modern medicine, indoor therapy. I've been in circles that have tried to use gratitude or other spiritual virtues to be the place of a cure for depression or other mental issues. If you are struggling with any of these issues, know that while I hope my sermon is encouraging and uplifting today, I do not think it is a cure-all. I pray that we are all willing to continue to seek to be the best selves we can be by seeking spiritual, emotional, and mental health. But the person we find in the story, it is gratitude that he is missing. He was driven by consumerism and greed rather than a heart that is thankful for what God has blessed him with already. When he gets an abundant crop, his first thoughts about how he can indulge himself, about how blessed he was and how he could use these crops, and not about how blessed he was and how he could use these crops to bless others. And so now we turn to Leviticus. This past year in Monday Morning Bible, we have been studying Leviticus. They groaned, when I told them that's what we were going to study for a year, as most people do. Typically, when somebody decides to read through the Bible, they rush through Genesis, filled mostly with stories, and they love it. Then they get to Exodus, which at its beginning is mostly stories, but ends with the description and building of the tabernacle. The last quarter or so of the book is pretty repetitive, but most people are able to plow through it. Where the wheels come off is often in Leviticus. You know, there's a spark of recognition out there. The first 5 chapters are all about sacrifices or offerings that could be made to God in this newly built tabernacle. There are descriptions on how the animals are to be slaughtered, and detailed instructions on which organs go where and which pieces need to be burnt, and how to sprinkle the blood around the altar. You know, the fun stuff. It is here that many people begin to miss a day or two of reading and then try to catch back up and end up quitting their adventure through the Bible. Leviticus is one of my favorite books of the Bible. A friend of mine up north said to me, "You love all the parts of the Bible that everyone hates." He's not wrong. But I think the reason that many people don't like Leviticus and other parts of the Bible is that sometimes we are so removed from the culture that we have a hard time putting ourselves in the author or the audience's shoes. While there are some gruesome descriptions of slaughtering animals, there are also some beautiful pictures about how God is working to reconcile, redeem, and renew Israel, and in extension, humanity. Leviticus is also misunderstood to be barbaric and unenlightened, but I think for its time, it was progressive and powerful while still being a little bit barbaric. When we talk about the sacrifices that are written in the first 5 chapters of Leviticus, most people think that they all have to do with appeasing a God after a person or community has sinned. When a wrong is committed, a punishment must be meted out, and God has given the Israelites a way to do that. But this is not what is happening in the first 3 sacrifices. These first 3 sacrifices in Leviticus are not ones for forgiveness, but ones of gratitude. The burnt offering, the grain offering, and the fellowship offering were ways of saying thank you to a God that had brought them up out of Egypt, a way of saying thank you to a God that had fed them with manna and quail in the wilderness, a way to say thank you to a God that helped them conquer the promised land, a way to say thank you to a God that had blessed them in so many ways. These 3 sacrifices or offerings were ones of great gratitude, pure joy of thanksgiving. Then the Leviticus passage that we read today talks about the festival of Pentecost, which Christians celebrate as the birthday of the church and the receiving of the Holy Spirit. But as described in Leviticus and Exodus, it's a festival to commemorate the giving of the law on Mount Sinai and also the earliest of the harvest festivals. The people would bring the first fruits or the first of their harvest to the tabernacle. They would wave it before the Lord. This was more than just a religious obligation, but a prayer of thanksgiving and a prayer to say, may the rest of our harvest be as bountiful as this. Notice what is right after this. They are told not to glean to the edge of the fields, that what is left is for the widows and the orphans, the aliens and the strangers. The implication of this is what God has blessed the Israelite farmers with a wonderful harvest. They had an obligation to help those who are less fortunate. As the article from Psychology Today pointed out, gratitude leads to generosity, to paying it forward. Not just reciprocity, repaying the one that blessed you, but reaching out to others, to truly being that generous person that Case was talking about during the children's moment. As I figured it was Father's Day, I figured I should tell a story about my dad. At my father's house in Sault Ste. Marie, he added onto his garage a photo studio that contained an office for himself. Not only did it have all the photo equipment that he and his wife needed to run the business, but he also had a desk where he wrote many of his last sermons at. He had a desk that was wildly messy. It was covered in papers, books, fly fishing equipment, photo equipment, poker chips, and falconry stuff. It was a mess. But one of the items I always remember seeing on his desk was a beer stein. You know, the kind in Germany with the flip-top lid. The one thing you need to know about my dad is he never liked beer. My brother and I kept trying to find a beer that he would like, but it never happened. What he used his beer stein for was collecting his change. Every time he came into his office, he would empty his pockets, and any loose change went into his beer stein. One day I was up there visiting him, and I came into his office. And he was sitting at his desk, sorting all his coins from his beer stein, wrapping them in bundles. I told him that the banks had machines now that could do this all for him in an instant. He told me he'd rather do it by hand. I asked him what he was going to do with the money that he saved up, thinking that I might be able to get a dinner out of this deal. He told me that every time that the beer stein got filled, he would find a friend of his that was doing mission work somewhere in the world, and then all that he had saved by putting his change in the stein would be sent to them. He went on to say that so many people had blessed him throughout his ministry, that he loved doing this for others, even if it was just a little bit. He was so grateful for his friends in ministry. The reason that he liked to sort and wrap the coins by hand was because he prayed for them in their work as he did it. I remember asking him who he was sending the money to this time. He told me, and I sat down to help him finish wrapping the coins. While I understand that there are some of us going through some rough times, and in the midst of those times it is hard to find any blessings, let alone enough to count. And I don't want to diminish that at all. I've had those moments as well. But on a whole, we are truly blessed. Our kind has had it relatively easy. As a church, we've been blessed with the great gift of a wonderful building, location, and a great staff. We could use it to seek our own spiritual pleasures, or we can use it to share the gospel in wider and wider circles. In our lives, we can find God's blessings all over the place. We often think of the ways that God has blessed us financially, and that's great. But there are so many more ways that God has blessed us. I sometimes see talents and abilities of people that they use only for themselves. These talents should be truly shared so they can bless others. A true perfect example of this is the musical talent that we see around our congregation. Other times we see people hoard their ideas. But as we enter into a new season of ministry with a new senior pastor, new ideas and new ways of doing things will all be needed. New ways of thinking about the problems around us. Let us bring those to the storehouse of God. My friends, we can build metaphorical barns and hoard all our blessings for ourselves. But I think God is calling us to share our blessings with one another, to build tables instead of barns. My friend, God calls us during these times of transition to count the blessings that He has given us, to let us give thanks to God for these blessings, and then let that gratitude percolate in our souls to produce generosity. This, my friends, will draw more and more people to the gospel of Jesus Christ. As we account for how God has blessed us with gratitude, let us move towards generosity in all that we do. Amen.